kind introduction there, and I am Tom Schrempp with WaterOne. I manage the water treatment operation for WaterOne, and that's from the water source all the way out to the customer. We have a different area that handles all the pipelines and that sort of thing. But with our facilities on the river, I have quite a long experience, over about 20 years with WaterOne in dealing with Missouri River issues. And we thought we'd tell you a little bit about the extreme weather challenges that WaterOne has seen over the years, and give you a little bit of an idea of what we do there. The photos here, kind of interesting just to start with. This first one is our new collector well, horizontal collector well on the Missouri River. And the Missouri River normally is on the bottom part of the trees here, but in the flood of 2011, we had to take a boat ride to get to that and operate that collector well. Behind it is our lime residuals treatment basin, and it's behind a levee, but the levee over top, and all of the farm field behind it for almost a mile was flooded with water also. And so it was a rather complicated way to get to the collector well. Have a couple of photos up here of our Kansas River intake, and a few years back we had a breach of the rock jetty structure that makes sure that water can get to the intake, and we were left high and dry. The last photo is actually of our Missouri River intake. It's a surface water intake, and we were in the middle of putting in low water pump capability on it, and ice formed in front of the barges that were working to perform the construction, and proceeded to cut off all the water to our Missouri River intake. So we were scrambling at that time in the middle of the winter. Fortunately, I'll tell you a little bit about WaterOne's operations, and one of the things we have is multiple water sources that gives us some flexibility in times where one particular source is in distress. We have some fallback capabilities. Just to tell you a little bit about who WaterOne is, it is a private, or not a private company. It's a government entity, quasi-municipal government. It's very similar to in law to a city government, but our sole purpose is drinking water, and we serve most of Johnson County. There are about 18 cities in Johnson County that we supply water to the customers retail. So it's not that we sell water to the individual cities and then they sell it to their citizens. We sell water directly to the retail customer. We have a 7-member elected board. They're elected from essentially our city limits or water district boundary, and they have full jurisdiction to set water rates and determine what's needed. We don't go to a state agency. So if our customers don't like what's being decided there, they go directly to voting on the elected representatives there to cause change to occur with our organization. WaterOne serves Johnson County, which is a rapidly growing area. Most of you are pretty familiar probably with Johnson County. Our current service population is about 407,000 people. Our treatment capacity is 200 million gallons a day. Our record so far in treatment is about 157 million gallons a day. So we try to build our facilities and stay ahead in the process so that there's always an adequate supply of safe drinking water to our customers. Our largest supply is 125 million gallon a day intake on the Missouri River, and we project that in 2050 continued growth in Johnson County is going to generate a need for 260 million gallons of water. So as we go into the future, we will be planning future expansions of our facilities in order to meet the needs of our customers. We do take the approach of we don't try and discourage water use, but we encourage wise water use. We don't want to see water being wasted, you know, people watering their lawns to the extent that water's running down the gutters, and it's just really a kind of a shame when you see that happening. But we try and meet what the customers, you know, are telling us they need and want as a water supply. We have our older facilities called the Hansen facilities, and they're supplied with 2 river intakes and a well field. The picture on the left is our Kansas River. The intake is down here, the river is down here at the bottom. It's a little bit dated picture. We've since put in a weir across the river that was permitted by the Corps of Engineers, and that weir you may have seen from I-435 if you're driving north across the Kansas River. For about 3 years the construction took place. We kind of wondered whether it was ever going to get done, but the weir assures that the water is available to go into our intake. Water goes in a tunnel under the railroad tracks and road to some treatment basins where we pre-treat the water, and then it goes to our main treatment plant. On the Missouri River, the intake, or the river is up the right corner here, and our intake is right there on the river. In the flood of 1993, we had to take a boat to get out to it. The water got so deep and totally surrounded it, it came all the way out to this railroad track right here. We pump the water out of the Missouri River into pre-sedimentation facilities, and then pump it 9.5 miles to our main treatment plant, the Hansen treatment plant. On both of these, the rivers are very variable in their water quality. They can be very turbid or dirty. We've seen as high as 4,000 NTUs. That's turbidity units. Other times of the year it'll be as clear as, say, 20 to 30 NTUs. So in order to be able to deal with those swings, we put in this very robust advanced treatment here, pre-treatment kind of process before it goes on to our main treatment plant. This is an aerial photo of the 2 treatment plants. Water comes from the Kansas River down the road here, and from Missouri up here. And there are actually 2 treatment plants. Facility 1 is the older facility, was originally designed for the Kansas River, and Facility 2 was originally designed for the Missouri River. We've got a lot of flexibility built into them. If we need water from one of the sources to go to one of the other plants, we have that capability. Our newest facility is the Wolcott treatment facility, and it's out where Highway 5 and I-435 roughly are located across there. We're a little bit further west than that, and with it, it's ultimately designed to deal with future expansion and population growth. This is the first stage of construction on it. We built a lot of advanced features into it. It's a membrane filtration plant, which is a new filtering technology versus conventional sand and anthracite filters. And part of trying to work with the neighborhood, you can see that it's a kind of a barn style, a horse barn. We went to the neighbors and we said, you know, we want to work with you in a facility that looks like what you would like to see. And being a rural setting, that was what they came back with, that they would like that. Our Hansen facility is more kind of a corporate campus kind of look, with brick structures. And so on this one, the feedback was that this was what the neighbors wanted there. As far as dealing with extreme weather challenges, our Missouri intake has been faced both with drought impacts and flooding impacts, and I'll go through that process. Same thing with the Kansas River intake and the collector well. So each of those has seen extremes, and there are impacts to them. The high river flows, the low river flows, both of them are challenges in the operation of our facilities. On the Missouri River, back in the 90s, we've monitored the river levels for our intake. And in 1990-91, St. Joseph actually ran out of water. The river levels dropped to a point they couldn't get water out of the river. And it was kind of, you know, we thought that was kind of a fluke and didn't think that much about it. But in 2000, 2001, BPU's Near Minden power plant ran out of water, and it's just downstream of our Missouri River intake. And it cost them several $1 million operationally and in modifications to get back into operation. And so as we were going to Corps of Engineer annual operating plan meetings, they started sharing with us a chart here that shows that this is, the bottom here is years starting in 1930 to about 2010, that as time goes on, at the sidebar here is stage in the river, and the actual different colors are different flow rates. So the light green here is 20,000 CFS, the highest one here is about 100,000 CFS. And what we're finding is that the river level for the same amount of flow has been dropping off, and really has dropped quite a bit from 1990 all the way out to 2010. And because of that channel degradation that's going on in the Kansas City Reach, you know, it was kind of a sudden light bulb coming on that we needed to pay attention to this and do something about it. This is a cross section of our intake as it was built, and what you run into, you get a sill height here of 718 elevation, and that was put in with what was supposedly the bottom of the river at the time. And what we've seen is the bottom of the river has dropped lower. Our actual operation submergence level requires an elevation of 723, and in the last 10 years we've had a couple of instances where we've dropped below that, and recognizing that trend, we took some steps to address that. This is just another chart kind of showing over a period of time. This was the levels in 1991, and then as each year in 2000 we've kind of plotted the lowest point in the river. The lowest we've measured is about 722.5, and that occurred in 2007. And at that time there was 16,200 CFS flowing by. Back in 1991, when St. Joseph ran out of water, we were way up in this elevation, about 725, or actually this spot here recognizes the low point. And there was only 7,000 CFS going by then, so a lot more water is having to be released to keep the same water level in the river right now. And so we have been involved with the Corps and the Mid-America Regional Council and quite a few other stakeholders in participating in a study to try and identify what measures can be done to correct the degradation problem and deal with it. Because to put in a new intake eventually to deal with further degradation, we're talking about many millions of dollars, probably hundreds of millions of dollars. So we want to find solutions that protect the river and still provide us access to water on it. So what we saw with the problems caused in the drought, we had record low river elevations. At times with the low flow we can have taste and odor problems develop. There's not as much runoff coming in, and things tend to kind of concentrate. So we get taste and odor issues that develop there. With the low levels, operationally it's a question of whether there's enough water depth to be able to actually operate our pumps. If they lose suction, and we're kind of out of business at that location. Drought conditions have been part of that factor. The Corps, particularly in the wintertime, limits the amount of flow they're releasing, and as a water conservation measure with drought. We wouldn't have as much problem with the drought if the degradation weren't occurring there. So the study that the Corps is doing is looking at the causes of it. You know, there are a number of different things. The reservoirs themselves upstream actually retain an awful lot of the sediment, and so the stream itself has been described as sediment starved. We also, because of some of the flood control structures maybe have constricted the channel, and some of the navigation improvements possibly also have constricted the channel to cause it to try and cut, to get a higher velocity and cuts the channel down. There's been some concerns that the dredging, sand dredging that's used to kind of fuel the economy as far as building, you know, as a main source for Portland cement or concrete to be construct new facilities, but that dredging has an impact by being taken out of the river. When we realized that we had a problem with the low river levels, we designed some facilities as a temporary measure to get us by, and spent $2 million on a low water pumping facility, and it was completed in 2004. And this is actually, each of these white units here, columns, is an individual pump, and they pump water up and over into our main intake, and then we run the pumps in our main intake to pump it on up to the pre-sedimentation facilities. In 2007, with the record low levels, we had to turn those pumps on, so it was money well spent to keep us from running out of water. We began to realize that it's not just the river intakes or water supplies that are being impacted by this degradation project. So it's one of the things that we've continued to follow. You know, one of the first things is if we were back to the 1990 conditions, they could be getting by with about 10,000 CFS lower releases than they currently do. Typically in the wintertime we're seeing about 20,000 CFS now, where in 1990 less than 10,000 would have been adequate for our operation. But, and that leaves more water in the reservoir if we can conserve it. That water, you know, benefits recreation up there. It's available for other uses and releases. Hydropower generation in the summertime when there's peak need for the power. It's available for release to support navigation. When we see the channel cutting down, we believe that it's eroding habitat and has some potential adverse impacts on endangered species. So there's been a number of things like that that have been a concern. The water can be released to support water quality if that's an issue. And if it's been released, then it's gone, and there's no way to take advantage of it. We're starting to see with the channel cutting down that there's a threat to the Corps' flood control structures, that they could be undermined. We've got levees with a toe slope. Well, if the channel now is 5 feet deeper, then the toe is undermined, and there's more risk that those levees could be in danger also. We've been, part of the stakeholders in the study have been with KDOT and MoDOT, because with river bridges, they put their piers in, and their piers were designed to be covered with a certain amount of silt. And if the river's cut down, it's exposing more of the piers, and there's risk for corrosion or damage to them. So that's been a concern also. And you know, from the design of the lakes upstream, for one of the potential uses for that water in the lakes is for irrigation on farmland, and the water stored, if it's not released because of the degradation, could benefit that. So we tried to identify that there are a lot of potential benefits to finding some solutions to the problems with degradation. Our new low water pumping facility cost us $2.35 million total, and we estimate that there's a certain amount of energy cost and taste and odor costs, taste and odor treatment costs. We use powdered activated carbon to treat for taste and odors in the river, and at because of low flows, potentially we can end up with having taste and odor problems that could be very expensive. There were some studies done. John Morando with the Corps of Engineers did a survey in 2005, and he estimated, based on the way he got information from different utilities, that just between 2000 and 2004, about $18 million was going to be spent on dealing with the degradation problems, and eventually, in the near future, possibly $63 million will be expended. And if degradation is not corrected and continues to cut down, that a lot of power plants, water supplies, levees, and everything can be undermined, and there's up to $286 million of infrastructure at risk by this. So, and there was a research institute at Columbia that looked into if navigation were discontinued for a season and the flows were dropped because of a drought, the potential cost for a non-navigation season is somewhere in the range of $128 million. As far as the activities going on to address that, as I mentioned, we're working with the Corps in Mid-America Regional Council. The Corps completed a reconnaissance study. That's the first stage of identifying is there a problem or not. It was completed in 2009. The Corps is now in the feasibility study. It was initiated in 2010 and is currently underway. We're involved with that process. With the things I described there, it's been determined to be a regional problem, and there are probably 30 different stakeholders that contribute dollars to funding this. The Corps is funding about 50% of the cost of the study. As I mentioned, the threats to river structures, levees, jetties, and discharge structures, the extra water, and impact on species and environment are all things that we are trying to look at as a part of this study. After covering all that about degradation and drought and that sort of thing, the flip side of it has been flood impacts. In 2011, for our Missouri River intake, we were pretty fortunate. The level didn't get up as high as it did in 1993, and we were able to access it without having to use a boat, so the water didn't get up that high. But in 1993, this photo shows back up here. This photo shows the intake, and we had to take a boat from the railroad tracks over here all the way over to the intake. But it did, in the way we designed it, it did stay in operation during that, and we scrambled a few times in keeping it going, but we're quite successful with that. Wanted to move on and talk a little bit about our Kansas River experience. The Kansas River was our original surface water supply, and was put in the early 1960s. The Missouri River first was constructed in the 80s, and then it's been expanded since then also. WaterOne's a member of the Kansas River Water Assurance District, KRWAD, and it's an organization that was formed to pool utilities and businesses' dollars to buy storage in the Kansas River reservoirs, and it purchased storage in the 1980s when the reservoirs were being built in Miford, Tuttle Creek, and Perry Reservoir. And as a part of that, it has an operations agreement with the Kansas Water Office, KWO, to provide some minimum amounts of flow. Basically, when the river gets so low that or below a certain target point, they will start releasing water from the Assurance District storage to help keep the flows up and the river levels up, where all of the users up and down the river can still access water and stay in operation. And we did update a study there in 2010, and there's still a 2.0 safety factor, and we did some evaluation of whether climate change in the long term might impact us. And what we found was that we were still in pretty good shape there. Assuming some of the worst case conditions, we felt like we still had more than a 1.0, really more than 1.5 safety factor for the storage that we had. So, but it is something that the concerns with climate change and being able to sustain your operations is part of what we put a large value on. On the Kansas River, with the low river flows, we've had to deal with icing and low levels off and on since 1963. Originally, when it first started having the problem, they just put a little extra rock out there in the river. And each year, that rock pile got higher and higher. And in 2004, there was somewhere between 10 and 20 foot of drop in the river from what it used to be as a river level to downstream of where we have our structure. So we realized at that point that we were fighting a losing battle of piling up this rock. Some studies of risk analysis showed that periodically it was going to get washed away, and if it washed away for a long time, we wouldn't be able to get water out of the river. So we went back to make a concrete cofferdam style weir to lock in the same river level that was protected by the rock structure. So it functioned essentially the same as the rock structure, and that was one of the reasons I think the Corps was willing to permit it, was that it was a continuation of what we had been doing there, and it reflected what the historical river levels were at our intake. At the same time, it made it a permanent installation that was not going to get washed out by a flood or damaged in adverse conditions like that. So, got a drawing here of the river. You can see the light part here is actually the rock jetty that was originally built there and got taller and taller. We came in with circular cofferdams all the way across the river. There are 18 cells that were constructed, and those are sheet piling driven all the way down to bedrock and filled inside with sand and rock, and then a grouted concrete top across the top there. And you can see that when you, almost any day when you're driving across I-435 across the Kansas River going north. We're on the east side of the river there. As far as trying to monitor those river operations, it was kind of, in the past, working with the USGS and the Corps of Engineers and the state agencies. We'd seen times where river levels had gotten so dangerously low we were in danger of having to shut down. And we didn't know how bad it could get and with the new weir. And we tested that pretty much this last winter. And the Bowersock Dam in Lawrence now has a web gauge that you can go and look up on the USGS website and see what the flows are coming down to us. And so we monitored that pretty closely, and we saw lower flows than we'd ever seen before. We were in communication to say, hey, you need to open the floodgates a little bit and let us have enough water to keep the minimum level in the river. So we monitor a number of different things. The actual USGS charts here. This is some Corps of Engineers discharge information. We go to the websites on weather forecast and what the temperature are. When the river gets extremely cold, water is actually kind of seems to be sucked out of the river. I think what goes on is that the tributaries start to ice in, so that ice isn't flowing into the river. It's not liquid anymore, and we end up with much reduced flows sometimes. Also, you can get ice flows build up and dam up and stop the water from coming through to us. So those kind of things have caused us operational problems in the past. But This past year, we really were pleased how well the new weir worked out with the operation there. The way it was designed resulted in the area right in front of our intake stayed open water without icing, where in the past we've seen ice jams there that have kind of cut us off from the river. The last area I kind of wanted to talk about is our new horizontal collector well at Wolcott. We put in, it's about a 25-foot diameter concrete caisson, and then well screen is pushed out horizontally from that location, from the caisson out into the formation, so you can get a lot of production out of the groundwater in an area by putting in that type of well versus a vertical well where it's a relatively small diameter and the screen is vertically through the formation, and you can actually draw down the formation to the point the screens are exposed to air, which can cause problems. So the well was designed for 15 MGD. We've actually been able to get 31.5 out of it most of the time. Part of that's because we've had higher water levels in the river. During our operation 2011, early part of 2012, we were in flood situations, so there was a lot of water flowing out of the river and into the alluvial aquifer. So it was a time where the formation was very productive. Warmer temperatures also affect the productivity of the well. You get more water in warm temperature, and cold water gets basically thicker or denser, and so when you get down below about 40 degrees, the viscosity of the water flowing into the river cuts back the capacity. We began tracking in this chart what we could expect out of the well based on the temperature of the well, and at 58 degrees Fahrenheit, we were getting, we could expect 33 million gallons a day out of the well. As we got down to about 40 degrees, it limited the capacity to about 25 million gallons a day. So this last year, we did have to actually cut back our operation on this during the winter, the river levels now are back up, higher levels, and the temperature is much higher also. So we're back to where we can get 31 million gallons a day out of this collector well. But we also had to design it for flood impacts. It was designed to operate in the 500-year flood, so that's why it stands so high above the ground. The actual equipment and everything is about 20 feet above the riverbank level there, and that's so that in a 500-year flood, that equipment all stays high and dry. In the flood of 2011, it isolated the collector well, as I pointed out in the picture. We had to buy a boat and an amphibious ATV to get out to it while the river was up, and there was a lot of current. We had to use the boat to come up from our Missouri River intake to the collector well. As the water started going back down, and we ended up with a lot of ponded areas where the water wasn't flowing and it wasn't deep enough to bring the boat up. We bought an amphibious ATV where it wouldn't be able to traverse through high currents and this sort of thing, but it was good in a kind of a ponded situation to be able to get us out there and continue to operate. We had to coordinate with the Corps of Engineers during the high flooding periods because they closed the river to navigation in Kansas City, and we coordinated that through the Wyandotte County Emergency Management Agency, and had to get special permission each time we had to go to the well to do any maintenance or service or reset equipment that had tripped out. We had to make those arrangements through Wyandotte County to the Corps of Engineers and say, hey, you need to get up there and do it because everyone else was excluded from the river. So this is a picture of the well. The well is right here. The main channel of the river comes right through here, and you can see the levee had failed on the north side of the river already and totally flooded. We were just at the brink of overtopping the levee in this photo, and you can see some water starting to appear on the back side of the levee. Eventually, this whole area behind the levee that's all green farm field was totally underwater all the way over to Highway 5. So the Lakeside Speedway, which is close by to us, was totally submerged in water also. So our guys would launch at our Missouri River intake, which is about 5 miles downriver, and they'd come up the main channel and go through this gap in the trees and tie off to the stairs. When we built this, we put a special garage door that was tall enough to be able to be opened up and pull a load into if we needed to access that. And the stairway also was put on the downstream side of the structure. So we knew that the situation eventually might happen, that we'd have to do exactly what we were doing, and it happened sooner rather than later for us. It's another picture of the collector well surrounded by water. During this flood, we did a lot of different things to try and coordinate with agencies on it. We were in touch with the county EMAs, Emergency Management Association, for agencies in Wyandotte, Johnson, and Leavenworth County. We worked with the Kansas Department of Emergency Management to coordinate things. Corps of Engineers stood up an emergency operations center, and we were regularly in touch with them. They actually took those photos for us when they did their helicopter flyovers of damage up and down the river on the levees. We monitored the National Weather Service AHAPS. I don't know what the acronym actually stands for there, but it tells you, what the current river levels are and flows for the river and what they're forecasting will occur for the next couple of weeks. And so we also have stayed involved with a number of monthly updates that the Corps put on climate outlook. So at the end there, I guess that's the end of my show there as far as that goes. So as you can see, there's a lot of challenges that we've had to deal with, both with high flow and low flow in the river, and it's been quite an experience, but we've been quite successful in our operations on it, and we try and stay engaged with what's going on with the river to follow up with the things that are going on. So with that, I'd open it up to any questions anyone might have.
As you take the questions, repeat the question as you take the question.
So I've seen this weir firsthand, and it basically looks like a compressed version of a pearl necklace. What's the significance of this circle that comprise the weir? Because I don't understand why that would necessarily be advantageous versus, say, a straight dam of sorts.
Right. From a constructability standpoint, one of the strongest structures that can be built is a circle. There's no edges for failure or that sort of thing. So in constructing it, they would build one of those cells at a time, and that makes for a very strong structure to it, and they can build it one of those cells at a time, and they go in between each two cells, and they work their way all the way across the river, and you didn't have to shut down the flow or cause any problems with operation of the river while we were building the structure. I'm sorry, I didn't repeat the question, did I?
So, I'm kind of wondering what you see in the future that you have to deal with all of this up till now. And then, obviously, everything's changing constantly, so what are you going to do? Black water.
The question is, what are we thinking that we'll have to deal with in the future on the river? And we we are working with the monitoring or the degradation program, degradation study right now, in the hopes that we can come up with some plans to address that situation and hopefully arrest it and maybe even reverse it somewhere we can get back to the kind of the original levels that we built our facilities for and be in that operation. So that's one process. The Corps will complete their study. They will identify what possibly can be done, and we may have to construct things or change things, modify things in both with our facilities and others up and down the river, or also the Corps' facilities up and down the river. If they determine that the channel maybe has been narrowed too much in certain stretches of the river, they may come back and say, let's modify those structures and open up the river a little bit more so that it doesn't cut down the channel as much. Well, yeah.
It's all kind of someplace where we go except the airport. You talked about some of the things you had to add for water treatment, low level with taste and odor. What about sediment? Do you have sediment problems that come up with?
The question is, in addition to taste and odor problems, do sediment, the sediment levels cause problems for us? We recognize the huge variability in that, and it's a treatment issue to deal with, and it does cost us money to treat for those things, but that's some of the natural conditions of the river that we anticipated that we would have to deal with, and that's one of the reasons why we built the pre-sedimentation facilities, is to have the ability to remove the majority of the sand and silt that's in the river before we send it on to the main treatment plant. And we return those silts and sands back to the river, so it's kind of a natural process there.
So your state lets you put sediment in the river?
Certain sediments are allowed to be put in the river. Some are permitted, others are not. In comparison, actually, Missouri has discharge permits for a lot of the water treatment plants and allows return of more solids actually than what we return to the river in Kansas. But it varies from state to state in that interpretation, and that is something that we try and coordinate with the EPA and the state agencies on that. I'm involved with the Missouri River Public Water Supply Association, and it includes the water utilities from St. Louis all the way up to Sioux City. And so we're trying to look for some consistency of how those are approached from state to state and how the EPA would have those restrictions.
Missouri has, the habitat restoration, they had an issue with sediment going back into the river. There were science issues there. And you had mentioned that the Corps was looking at sediment starvation as one of the contributing factors to the bottom falling out.
Right.
Have they decided, where are they leading? When is the study going to be done? I mean, I know they've changed the way the sanding, the dredging permits are done. So that instead of digging one hole, they were doing basically a 5-mile shallow hole to try to negate, the heavy impact of that.
So the question is kind of with the sediment starved river due to the reservoirs upstream and the dredging and all this, and yet we see high levels of sediment, and the Corps of Engineers with their shallow water habitat for the pallid sturgeon have been constructing chutes and dumping the solids, sediments from that construction back into the river. How do you balance all that out? And we are struggling with a lot of that. And I don't know that we have a good answer for that. It's next to impossible with a reservoir to be able to find a way to pass the sediment that's trapped in it downriver. There have been some thoughts of pipelines or some way to do that, but you're talking about some huge volumes of material to try and deal with there, and haven't found something that's a good solution there. There's a real contradiction in how things are approached in a lot of different ways, and I don't know that anybody's found the right solution on it. The Corps with the chutes is putting this material back in. At the same time, farmers are really taken to task for to do conservation measures, and failure to do so carries penalties. And that conservation measures are to prevent sediment from getting into the river. So how can the Corps put stuff in the river like they're doing for the construction of the chutes at the same time that they're being so restrictive to other people? It's, don't follow my laws or anything there. A lot of that is what the state agencies are differing with right now between whether the Corps has the right to do that or not. And there have been hearings both in Missouri and in Iowa here as far as some of the construction work that's gone on with that.
Well, we can make all the regulations we want, but the fact is that the river carries a whole lot more sediment historically than it does now, and there's Planck's constant where rivers carry X amount of sediment, you change that amount of sediment, and the river tries to adjust itself. And so that's what they're looking at some of that. So, it really doesn't matter what we do. We kind of saw in the 2011 flood that, there is no control. You can try to anticipate, but we can't really change the way physics work and the natural system works, other than moving the problem up and down the river. I had heard that St. Joe, the bottom was falling out in St. Joe, but it seems to have stabilized. But they didn't really know why that was. Have you heard anything else about that? Or?
I haven't heard any conclusions on the question of whether the bottom is stabilized in St. Joe. But the core study is primarily for degradation right now in the Kansas City reach. They looked, before they focused on the Kansas City reach, they looked all the way up and down the river, and they said, where are the most severe problems? There are actually a few reaches of the river that are actually aggrading instead of degrading. They're actually filling up, and the river bottom is higher than it used to be. And they have created some hydraulic models of the river that will account for the sediment loads and what to expect. And they're trying to come up with what's going on there, identify what measures we can take to try and deal with that. Some of those, they've talked about constructing hard points in the river, basically a ditch check or that sort of thing, to help lock in that the river won't cut down further. At this point, it's premature to guess what they're going to recommend as a solution on it, but the study is underway, and it is very important. It has huge cost impacts to water supplies, wastewater treatment plants, power plants, all the facilities in the area that are seeing degradation that are along the river, levees, dams, bridges, pipeline crossings, all those things potentially are placed at risk as the channel cuts down. So it is important to try and find a solution, and we haven't claimed to have the answer yet. The study is going on, and the Corps is planning to announce alternates for some alternates that they think should be considered in the next couple of months here as a part of that study, and they hope to wrap up the study here in the next year as far as completing the stage of saying, here's the alternates, and let's decide what might be the appropriate fix. They recommend a fix at that point, and then we would go forward with trying to construct those. There would be a definite process with picking an alternate and saying, this is what we want to do as a solution. There'll be environmental studies, there'll be you know, feasibilities, costs, economic impacts, all those things will come into play.
One more thing, the 2011 flood, did that increase the amount of degradation? I know in other parts of the river, like Sioux City, where they were dumping all of that water.
I haven't seen any final results on it. I understood that there was a pretty significant drop in channel level. Additional degradation occurred because of the flood of 2011, and the Corps hasn't, that I've seen, hasn't put out final numbers on what they think actually occurred with that yet. So.
And on your Kansas River intake, do you see the Kansas River dropping as a result of the Missouri River, the head cutting going up the river? Or?
I really think that's what's going on there. It was originally we just thought, well, it's just degradation in the Kansas River, and it's something we're going to deal with there. As we've gotten into understanding what's going on with the Missouri River and realizing how much it's dropped, you can see a real correlation with how much the river has dropped downstream of our weir on the Kansas River. And one of the things that our weir does is protect channel erosion upstream for all that farmland, all the bridges, all the levees and everything there. So, you know, we felt like there was a lot of value and benefit to people upstream from it, and not just WaterOne that saw benefits from constructing the weir there. You know, we're thrown out to what can we build a weir at the Missouri River intake the same way. The Missouri is a navigable river, and you can't put structures in the river that would keep the ability to get traffic up and down the river. So, I think
this, my question was somewhat answered by this. I guess so the Corps was successful in dredging the Missouri River in the 60s, because that's what they wanted it to be, an ever-cleansing river, correct? And it just doesn't do a good job.
Well, maybe they have done too good a job there. The question was, the Corps designed the river to be self-cleaning, and they did a lot of dredging and a lot of channel structures to constrict the flow and keep the velocity up in the main channel of the river to keep it scoured out. And you know, one of the questions is, you know, did we overdo that? Is that additional velocity causing additional scour? Their intent in the design is to keep it from sedimenting up and filling up with sediment and losing, you know, basically degrading the level of the river in certain locations, and to try and stabilize that. They weren't intending for it to cut on down, but it is one of the factors that's being looked at on that, what needs to be done there. And they may decide, I don't think it's that they would eliminate the structure, but it would be, shall we modify those in certain ways to create a more stable river bottom for us. I think there's a question over here.
Are your weir, is that capable of just completely cutting that river off, or does it have a flag tax on it, or?
It's a totally uncontrolled. The question was, our Kansas River weir, can we cut the river off or shut down the flow on the river by it having been built there? It is a totally uncontrolled structure. There's no floodgates, no control.
Right, I understand that, but I mean, is it going completely across the river? Is there any bypass on either side of it?
No.
Water level drops, it will completely shut that river off. So no fish can go past there, or boats or anything.
At low levels, yes. There is a fish passage that was constructed as a part of it, or as part of the original rock structure that continues to be in place there. And at lower flows, it's intended to continue to allow fish to get up and down it, rather than make it passable. You know, a lock dam or some other structure. We have a portage at that location for canoe traffic. That's part of what we put in place with the construction there. It's kind of amazing when you get to the flood of 2011, the river levels get so high that the Missouri River actually backed up and submerged the weir. So, I mean, you get that much of an effect of it, and it flows over, average flows in the river are probably 4,000 or 5,000 CFS. It flows over, I think, about 20,000. There's a continuous full depth stream all the way across the channel, and fish can get through there. It was kind of interesting. We had experienced a fish kill. It was an Asian carp that got, as the river level dropped, and had the old rock structure, and they got trapped in the little pools in the rock structure. And we got some comments of, well, at least your weir is blocking them from moving up the river. And I'm kind of going, when the river gets up enough, it's green light for them to go on. So we are not in a case where we're really obstructing migration of fish up and down the river. At least not. There may be periods of time where it's less favorable for that. But, I think there was a question back here first.
Yeah, I just had kind of a technical question. Is drinking water piped from one side of the river to the other? If so, how big a pipe was it?
At WaterOne, drinking water isn't piped across the Missouri River. Our new Wolcott plant does have a pipeline tunnel under the Kansas River that carries drinking water from the Wolcott site which is close to the Missouri River, to Johnson County. In Kansas City, Missouri has two major tunnels from the water treatment plant, which is located on the north side of the river, to downtown. So, but there are a very limited number of crossings of water supply across the river.
What is the cost of, or what was the cost of constructing the collector well system? And as you plan for the future growth, are you considering putting more of those in versus river? What's the future?
All right. The question was, what was the cost of the collector well, our new water supply source there, and are we planning to do more of those? That particular one cost about $15 million. The total construction project of the treatment plant was about $75 million. And when we included all the pipelines and everything to get the water to Johnson County, it was close to $150, maybe even $200 million for all the projects associated with that. We have found the collector wells to be very successful for us, and we have future plans in the near vicinity of that particular well. The aquifer will support 3 additional wells, and so we are looking at out into the future, putting in additional horizontal collector wells as our next water source. We've also been looking at, we have a well field on the Kansas River that was put in the 50s and is in very poor shape, and it's downstream of our weir, so the degradation has caused the water table to recede significantly, and that was a little formation. We're looking at the potential for putting a collector well upstream of the weir, where we know that we have a locked-in future water table level that will be supported by the river, and so we are looking at the potential of putting a collector well there. Kansas River is a much smaller river. It would be much smaller wells than the ones we put in on the Missouri. I think you have a question? Or?
I might end up with non-river specific or an operational thing. So do you do all the delivery of water from to the house directly to your discharge system?
Personally,
not you personally,
yeah, our company.
Do you have a separate system for potable and then like water for the yards, or is it all together?
The question was, is there a non-potable system in addition to the potable water supply in our service area? And the answer is no. It's all we're watering yards with drinking water, and well, and I guess I would say we did studies to look at, could we put in a separate system to supply that. We look for what we're, for example, the corporate woods area has a lot of irrigation systems up and down the road for the different corporations. And in the 90s, we did a study whether we could recycle wastewater and deliver it to them. And we did a cost analysis on it. And the complications and having two parallel systems is more expensive to do than going ahead and just providing the drinking water. Now that's not always the case in every location in the states here. There's some very successful water reuse applications going on in other parts. Typically where we see it most of all is when there's an extreme water shortage as far as a water supply or water source, that they have to turn to alternative sources like water reuse in order to stretch the amount of water they have. So it's...
The other question is, with the not so secret and sometimes not so secret in third world privatization of water supplies and sources, you said you're a quasi-public governmental. How safeguarded is that against, say, the Koch brothers buying, taking water and privatizing it, and then deciding that no one needs as much water as they have to take in charge of that? Are you guys protected legally from privatization?
The question is privatization. Are we at risk of being privatized? Privatization in the water industry was a very big issue 10 years ago. It's been a lot less so recently. There were a number of major privatizations that occurred across the United States, and over time it seems that the direction, maybe the pendulum has swung. There have been a number of privatized utilities that now have switched back to becoming a public water supply. WaterOne really kind of prides itself in its operation. We try to operate ourselves as a very efficient corporate organization, and we feel like as long as we're able to do that and be a good steward and a good efficient operation, then we aren't attractive to a company trying to take us over. The money to be made is in that upgrading from a problem facility to getting a much better or better quality system.
Proximity is not like water.
So, to follow that question, if you're a voter-elected board, the voters have to make a decision to privatize it. It seems to be
Definitely.
buyout.
Privatization would require some sort of vote of the people that are out there. We are established under certain enabling legislation in Kansas, and our board has that jurisdiction. So privatization would be difficult to be done to an organization such as ours.
Okay, I just wondered if you had so the board makes that decision, or do you have to get a referendum?
The board could contract out some of the operations, but I don't think they could privatize it without a change in the enabling legislation of the state legislature.
Our efforts as individuals make any difference and have the potential to make any difference in water usage. I have a drought-tolerant landscape that I put in landscapes in schools and libraries, commercial areas. Does that really mean anything?
The question is, can you make a difference? Can individuals make a difference by how they conserve and use water? Whether you use water conserving plantings or put more water efficient facilities. There's definitely a trend and an impact of people doing that, and we support that. And one of the things is because we are in a growing area. If we can trim back some of those usages, then it means we don't have to build new facilities to supply it. So there's a benefit to us to support that. And I wouldn't say that we aren't extremely aggressive because we recognize that we have to respond to all of our customers, and there are a lot of customers that like their green lawns and they want to water it and water their grass and that sort of thing. So we try and strike a balance between encouraging conservation, wise water use, and allowing our customers to do what they see as their quality of life. So.
I moved here from Fort Wayne several years back, and I was in a rural energy subdivision there. They've done a project that relates to what you said. In those two developments, they have 2 water meters in each house. One meters of house usage, the other goes to the faucets and irrigation systems. I found that it was a lot easier for me to regulate how much water I was putting on my lawn, and specifically what went to lawn, and it also lowered the prices considerably. That was at the homeowner's expense. Maybe put that in your high-growth areas.
His question is one, he's had experience in Fort Wayne where they have gone to separate meters for domestic use and for lawn irrigation, and so they have 2 different meters. There's been a successful approach in some utilities to do that. WaterOne took the approach instead of kind of building that into its water rate. And so we charge one rate, a tier 1 rate, a less expensive rate for essentially domestic use up to 25% above your winter time consumption. So we're kind of looking, people aren't watering their lawns in the winter. So we're saying, you can keep up to 25% over what you use in the winter. You pay for it at the lower rates, and then we have about $1 a thousand higher rate cost for any water usage above that. And one of the things that's a good equity thing, if people are going to use that much extra water, then they ought to be the ones paying for the improvements and the cost of doing it. So we've taken the approach of incorporating it that way in our water rate rather than trying to do a structural improvement, putting individual meters in, or separate meters in for water and domestic and irrigation. So there are a lot of different innovative approaches to it. We don't own the rights to a lot of good ideas out there.
They don't do that literally.
No. For many, many years, the approach was one of declining rate. The more water you use, the cheaper it got. And it didn't discourage any water it didn't encourage water conservation. It just encouraged wasting water, basically, in a lot of ways. So with the tiered structure we have, we feel like we send a good, strong message to say, hey, if you're going to do things like use a lot more water than the typical customer, then you need to pay for it.
The intake station on Missouri has been accessed by boat.
Yes.
What happens to that structure when totally submerged? Is it operating?
The question is,
Catastrophic
right.
situation.
Is there a situation where our new collector well or even our other facilities could be submerged or flooded out in an extreme flood? I think we've seen one of the most extreme ones, or actually a couple of the most extreme ones possible. If the level did get up to a level to flood that, yes, it would shut down our operations. I'm sure we would do as many measures as we could to sandbag it and everything and protect it further before it. Right. It's built very sturdy. I don't think it's going to wash away. What we have is temporarily we might be out of service because of water getting into the equipment. We build our facilities to the 500-year flood plus 1 foot. So we don't have any records of ever having a 500-year flood. I can't say it won't ever happen, but when you see how full the river is already, as you go up, it spills over into more and more area, farther out into the farmland and all this. So it takes huge amounts of additional flow to bring it on up to the point that it might inundate our flood protected structures. So I think it's pretty unlikely, but there is that very slim risk.
To get your line to say,
But the dams upstream, there's a lot of pressure on it, but it will cool. High snow melt, high wave, all that set. 2011, a lot of discussion about
Right.
failure, pushing the other one.
If there was a total catastrophic failure of the dams upstream, I think the least of our worries might be whether our water systems are still in place, because we're talking about significant portions of the metro area being washed away, basically, something like that.
and still be in the Portland, somewhere way down southern state at that point.
There was a question, I think, back here first, and, yeah.
2012, do you have any idea of what better water usage? Do you have any idea of what percent of your drinking water belongs with that drought?
We do monitor, the question was water loss in 2012, and we monitor it every year, what our water loss is. And we've been averaging in the 12 to 14% water loss range on that. And that's, we'd like to do better than that, but we feel like it's pretty good overall. There are a lot of utilities that have much higher water loss than that, and it's within the range that is expected for a well-operated water utility. So, but water loss is something that's part of our goal. We have a main break, we get out there and we fix it. We don't let the water run for days and days and days if at all possible. So, you have a question?
What does it mean to the river to fill out 1 million gallons?
It's a real drop in the bucket. The question is, what does it mean to the river when we take 31 million gallons a day out of it every day? The amount of water we take out of the river is around 1/10 of 1% of the total flow going by. So we're a tiny drop in the bucket, really, of all the water that's going by. And there's been questions with your withdrawal, is it causing a drop in water level downstream? And it's not possible. It's so insignificant that you can't really measure a drop caused by our water diversions.
Question in that same vein. We're sucking it out of the river, we're also bringing it back in. What's the net difference between what the sewers and the discharge and what they suck out?
The question is how much of the water that we take out of the river ends up returning to the river. And it's somewhere in the 60 to 80% range. And probably 60% in the summertime when all of that water is being put on the ground for irrigation and is soaking into the ground. Now, we're evaporating versus, the sanitary treatment of waste and that sort of thing. About 60% of it comes back and is discharged back to the river. So, question back here behind it.
What kind of money surplus did you end up with in 2000?
We ended up with a very significant surplus in 2012 with the water sale. It was about $20 million excess revenue. To kind of put that in perspective, we had 3 very wet years prior to that, 2008, 2009, and 2010. And during those periods, we had revenue shortfalls of over $30 million for those total for those 3 years. So that 1 year didn't really totally replenish what we didn't get in previous years. So, it kind of puts a little bit of perspective there. The other part is, being a government entity, that money doesn't go as a profit to someone. We put that money in our reserve funds for building new facilities and constructing, and we have a much bigger long-range cost of, so when we get that, it's kind of a windfall to us, but it goes into further improvements of the utility, and it's not something that is kind of lost or wasted or someone else gets the benefit of. But it is, there is definitely money, extra money comes in a dry year. Are we down here at this point? I think there's quite a few questions.